A late January edition of OU Sooners Live, number 99 here at the Voice of College Football. Welcome in here to our Oklahoma show that we provide each and every week. As we mentioned each and every week, please subscribe, hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Jason and I need to coordinate our schedules each and every week, so we do our very best and hit that Wednesday time just about every week. But again, schedules get in the way, and we need to coordinate it each and every week. So we want you to be here and never miss. So this week we had to do it on a Friday, and here we are to talk Oklahoma football. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. It was kind of as we've talked about in these recent weeks, it's been a little bit of a frenzy between specifically after the season ended with the bowl game and then the early signing period and then the transfer portal. But it's kind of came to a little bit, not a complete stop, but a little bit of a slowdown here as the transfer portal window has closed for the time being.
A couple of minor news and notes just to take care of business here. OU has added an offensive line commit, Drew Batts, 6'8", 250, played 8-man football, not listed in 247 in regards to a ranking there, but more of the preferred walk-on route for Drew Batt is an offensive lineman committing here in the last couple of days, and then also defensive lineman Reed Lindsay, who was on campus and with the football program and with the team for 4 years, but recorded no statistics. Basically didn't get on the field for the past 4 years. Reed Lindsay has entered the transfer portal just to get those news items out of the way. But what is being discussed, it seems, first and foremost, is with Alabama losing its offensive coordinator, Bill O'Brien, that there is an opening there, that Jeff Lebby has obviously done a fine job both in the SEC and with Oklahoma and would be a prime candidate for that job. And that has been swirling out there among the rumor mill recently, Jason.
Yeah, Mark, I think it's interesting. To your point, a guy like Jeff Lebby that's had success in the SEC has had success in the Big 12, obviously with Baylor, and then all accounts, particularly from a run game perspective, has had a lot of success even this year with Oklahoma. And I think in some of the things that Saban has said in terms of what he's looking for from an offensive coordinator, I think he's looking for a guy that's going to get Alabama back to their roots, so to speak, a little bit, just in terms of having a more powerful and better running game. So I think kind of depending on who you talk to, Mark, and kind of what you hear, Levy's either, his number one choice or certainly somewhere within the top three of his choices right now as an offensive coordinator. So it's one of those things that I think Lebby has been very tight-lipped, just in terms of, as you would expect for a large degree, but he's been fairly tight-lipped just in terms of and people around him or whether there would be any mutual interest. I mean, I think it would be difficult for him to leave Oklahoma, as with his being his alma mater, outside of a head coaching job. Now, I say that with the fact that when Saban comes calling, you have to at least listen, right? I mean, you have to listen to the conversation, and so it's one of those things that I would say personally, just from what I'm hearing, there's a chance that if he was offered the job, he would take it, but I don't think it's a slam dunk, or I think there's a much bigger chance that he would stay in Norman with Oklahoma as opposed to moving on with Alabama and Saban, because you look at one side, there's a lot of pressure at both schools, right? Obviously, but I think there's enormous, even maybe even a little bit more pressure at a place like Alabama, not only working for a guy like Saban, who is very much a perfectionist in every stretch of the imagination, but I think also there's a lot more eyeballs and expectations for Alabama's offense, and specifically how they ended this season, not even making the playoffs, and so obviously Oklahoma's kind of still building, and he's got a little bit of I don't know if leeway is the right word to use, but there's a little bit more patience, I think, at Oklahoma. So it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. I wouldn't be surprised to see something happen pretty soon. Obviously, Saban has both an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator to replace. Although I've heard some rumors that Jeremy Pruitt could end up being the guy on the defensive side of the ball for that. But something to continue to look at as Oklahoma kind of progresses through this early spring, and getting into spring ball and things like that. If that continues to be something that is an option for Lebby, and how that it obviously ends up impacting Oklahoma one way or the other.
Yeah, Jeremy Pruitt, certainly considered arguably uh, the best defensive coordinator in the country. That's how he made his way up through the ranks, and certainly put himself in a position to get a head coaching job in the SEC. Uh, Issues aside, just in terms of managing a defense, coordinating a defense, and of course, those issues that he created, let's say, would not be a factor, as he would not be running the football program. So he's highly coveted in that position, and certainly available because of his misdeeds. So he is out there, and that seems to be an obvious connection. He's, again, considered one of the best, and Alabama's looking for the best in those coordinator positions. So, yeah, we will continue to track that and discuss that, and see how things play out, and if there are any moves. And another factor in this, and I don't know what the numbers are, but the reputation for the top SEC schools is that they pay assistants and coordinators in particular more than anybody else. And how that would play out and what those numbers would be between Alabama and Oklahoma, I don't know. But of course, again, those top SEC schools have the reputation of breaking the bank for top coordinators, and do pay at the highest level. I think some of the other conferences and the major powers in those conferences are catching up and have stepped it up in recent years. But of course, Oklahoma's coming to the SEC, so they're going to be playing in that sandbox with everybody else, and having to dish out those kind of numbers.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important to consider here and obviously I'm not necessarily advocating for one way or the other. I think he did a great job this year, particularly within the run game for Oklahoma, in his first year. But the track record of coordinators at Alabama that have went on, whether it's head coaches, or whether it's different programs, and being very, very successful. I think that's probably got a weigh on his mind, understanding that probably he feels like, I would assume at this point, right? He feels like his next logical step is to be a head coach somewhere, obviously at the FBS level, whether it's Power Five or whatever it is. I think, inside his camp, like that's where he wants to be in his next step. So does a place like Alabama, does he feel like that affords him a better opportunity to get to go to that next step? Now, I don't know, it's kind of rhetorical in nature, but I think both places have provided successful career paths. I know people don't like, we don't really like talking about Lincoln Riley on here, but Lincoln Riley went from obviously Oklahoma's offensive coordinator, head coach, and now, so that progression has been successful on other arenas. Like Josh Heupel's another one that, interestingly enough, he was fired as the Oklahoma offensive coordinator, and now he's He's done just a fantastic job at Tennessee over the last couple of years, surpassed my expectations of what he would be able to do. So, I think it's almost six in one hand, half a dozen in the other in terms of what that looks like. So I think, ultimately the money. I think he's one of the highest paid offensive coordinators at Oklahoma. But you're right, Mark. I mean, I think the ability for Alabama to pay their coordinators a lot of money is something that I don't know if that's enticing to him or not. But I think it'll be something that I think at the end of the day, if they have a conversation or they talk to him, I think it's something that he'll certainly consider. Now, how serious is that consideration will be interesting to follow.
We invite your comments and questions here at the Voice of College Football. We come your way each and every week. That is typically on Wednesday. We hit you on Friday this week here at the Voice of College Football. So keep up, please, with the notifications, because we always notify you as soon as possible when we need to make an adjustment to the schedule. And also keep in mind that I posted on the community page of the main channel each day what the live schedule is. And then I also posted here on the Oklahoma channel if we've got a schedule adjustment. So good to see everybody here on a Friday, and lock it in here for the next 45 minutes or so talking Oklahoma football. What's also interesting to follow as we follow the coordinator possibilities would be, I don't recall, with all the conference expansion and realignment over the past 12 or 13 years, there being a time where the date set for a particular school, or it's typically 2 or 4 in even numbers, moving to another conference, that there was just this floating timeline out there. It usually was set. Okay, so-and-so and so-and-so are moving to the Big Ten. Here's the date. This is when we can all count on it. It didn't move. It didn't shift. Doom, they moved. And this has happened with every conference where they've had and added teams here in the last 12 or 13 years. And again, it's been like clockwork, and whatever was the original date followed through. And somebody can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, if I've missed anything. But with this Oklahoma, Texas move to the SEC, this seems to be still just kind of out there that there's a projection for 2024, and it's been moved up from 25 to 24, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was originally 25 or 26.
25.
Anyway,
Yeah.
25 and then up to 24. So there is a reported estimation, but I never recalled in these other situations there being so much out there, and it actually being confirmed by conference commissioners that it's being discussed, that that could change, and that it's still possible that there could be an adjustment in the target date for, in this case, Texas and Oklahoma, to move to the SEC.
Yeah, it's been very bizarre, Mark. I think obviously, I think most people, when the initial announcement came out that it would be in 2025, there was some understanding that yes, there would be a significant financial impact if Oklahoma and Texas, wanted to pursue leaving early. But I think at the same time, most people didn't think that Oklahoma and Texas would still remain in their minds. I think probably, no disrespect to the Big 12, but without them, they feel would be a kind of a lame duck conference at that point, right? So I think all the assumptions and the thoughts were that it wouldn't go until 2025, and so I think there was some things that that out there that we thought that ESPN would help drive this in a certain degree with with the SEC network, and just how much more money they would probably be set to make with Oklahoma and Texas being in the conference. And so it was a little bit, like you said, a little bit in limbo. It kind of had moved back and forth, and but I think everything changed for me, and I know that we've talked about this a lot, but I think everything changed for me and my assumption when the Big Ten did what they did with USC and UCLA, And again, that was a very hard, to your point, that was a very hard date. Like this is happening in 2024. So I think with that happening, that for me, and I think a lot of others, really confirmed the idea that Oklahoma and Texas probably were not going to wait, and the SEC were not interested in waiting until 2025. Now, even this week, we've heard a little bit of rumor that potentially this could happen as early as 2023. Now, I think it's kind of interesting how different a year makes. At this point last year, I think we were talking about Oklahoma was much in a much better position to move to the SEC than maybe they've been in years past. Now, this year happened, and maybe not quite so confident that Oklahoma's ready with the talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, for to move over to the SEC. So I think that will be interesting. I still think it's when you look at things like this, when you don't know the data completely, 100% from a conspiracy theorist perspective, right? When you look at the Big 12 has not released their schedule yet, so there's something that's causing the delay in the release of that. And I think you'd mentioned before we went on air that the SEC has released their schedule, and I don't know about the other Power Five schools, Power Five conferences, but there's something to that delay because it's been announced to be a delay on a couple of different occasions. So I think ultimately, if the price is right, I think the idea for Oklahoma and Texas to move over as quickly as possible, I think is a fair and very valid assumption that's happening now. Can they do all the things that they need to do to be able to make that happen from a financial perspective? I mean, we all know when these things happen, there's some arbitration that goes on, and it's really kind of settled out of court from a settlement perspective right there. But it's very intriguing to watch. I think in the back of our minds, we think, here it is almost December, and you've got games starting in these conferences in 6 months. So, 7 months about. So, is that enough time for everything that needs to happen in order for Oklahoma and Texas to move in 2023? I still think it's more likely 24. Now, I would say if you're looking at 2025 versus 2023, I think there's probably a better chance that it happens in 2023 versus Oklahoma and Texas remaining in this Big 12 conference for a couple of years. But it'll be interesting to watch. But if it does happen, you have to think, and I know that we've said this a few times, but I think you have to think there's at some point here in the relative near future, there is a line in the sand where there's some announcements that comes out that says, okay, we're moving in 2024. We've settled out of court for whatever this amount is, and we're moving in 2024 or 2023. If that's the case, you would think that announcement would happen sooner rather than later. No pun intended.
Every time there's been a major move in college football, the SEC has built a reputation for being at the forefront of that change, whether that's the first conference to create a conference championship game. You can go down the line. The SEC has built a reputation through the decades, and I think it's pretty valid and been justified that they are typically going to be the forerunner and make their decision quickly and decisively and then move on it quickly and decisively. So this would be an exception where the Big Ten announcement and decision agreement was all made this past summer, a year after Oklahoma and Texas. And based on the original dates that were projected for the moves, the Big Ten would have been a full 2 years ahead of the SEC because it was decided a year later, and they would be moving a year sooner we are now down to the Big Ten being a year ahead of the SEC in regards to making those moves. Now, if we look at the released schedules, the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Pac 12 have all released schedules with dates. The ACC has its schedule release coming next Monday. And shameless plug here, we will do an ACC schedule release at 7 p.m. Eastern Time live on all the ACC channels because that's when they're going to release the schedule. So we'll break down what is going to be a new and revised ACC format with no divisions and with permanent rivals and all of that. So a different take on the ACC scheduling coming up here in 23. But as Jason outlines, the Big 12 still has yet to release its schedule. Sure, there's a different dynamic there that may be delaying them with the 4 new schools coming in and the 2 that are leaving most likely still being around. So they've got a 14 team league to deal with this year. And so obviously not everyone's going to play everyone, as has been the case for quite a long time in the Big 12 with 10 teams playing 9 conference games.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting thing to discuss as we've mentioned, and I know there's a lot of discussion about would since Oklahoma and Oklahoma State looks like that rivalry is not necessarily going to be renewed on a regular basis, would that be something that would Oklahoma and Oklahoma State continue to play each other for this year, or if it happened to be 2 years? So I think that's part of the equation. That's part of the intrigue. I know that me and you both, I mean, as intrigued as I am and excited I am to see Oklahoma compete in the SEC, there's still some intrigue in this Big 12, for a season as well. So yeah, I think there's, and that's why I kind of mentioned that you have to think that the decisions either have already been made and they're obviously they're just not made public at some point if it's 2023, because there's a lot of scheduling considerations and a lot of other things that need to happen. So it'll be interesting to watch for sure.
I think that the Big 12 schedule release is by far the most interesting and intriguing with the 4 new additions. And then again, with the existing teams, Oklahoma and Texas, and just to see if there are any obvious disadvantages that the Big 12 wants to place on Oklahoma and Texas in regards to scheduling, road schedules, difficult trips back to back. For example, Oklahoma having to go to Orlando to play Central Florida, and then the next week have to travel to BYU.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anything obvious like that, and even if there's not, just the intrigue, at least that I have, I don't know where everybody else stands on this, just to see some fresh matchups. And I don't know how much the Big 12 is going to integrate the 4 new schools into Oklahoma and Texas's schedules. Maybe they will try to separate them as much as possible. I would find it more interesting if they played as much as possible, because we're not going to get to see Texas go to Orlando to play UCF or Oklahoma go to Cincinnati and play in the future. So I'm interested to see those matchups. I'm interested also, excuse me, from a Big 12 perspective going forward in terms of conference rivalries and what the conference wants to do with establishing rivalries. Houston's obviously right in the middle of it. They have a long-standing tradition going way back to the Southwest Conference days with a number of these schools like Baylor and TCU. So to see if that's really a huge emphasis in Houston's schedule to make sure that they're playing everybody in the state of Texas to reestablish those rivalries. Also, and I know that they they play a lot of those schools on a regular basis. They've played Texas Tech, for example, the last 2 years, home and home. Uh, then the other geographical connection for me is West Virginia's on an island by itself in the Big 12 right now. They're just
Mhm.
sitting out there, and it's got to be to a disadvantage from a recruiting standpoint,
Mhm.
because if you play high school football in Oklahoma, and let's say you're not good enough or you get bypassed by Oklahoma, but you can play for Oklahoma State, or even if Oklahoma State doesn't want you, there's a number of options to stay within the region and still come home or near your family and friends to play. You're in the region. So you've got a number of options. And so you would think that the spillover between states is fairly common, as opposed to if you're in the state of West Virginia and you want to play big time college football, okay, you're either have it set on you want to play at West Virginia. But if you're in Pennsylvania or Maryland or Virginia in a neighboring state, what's your incentive to go play at West Virginia and play all your games in Texas and Kansas and Oklahoma? So you're going to take, most likely, if that's important to you, and let's say you're that second or third tier prospect, you're a high 3-star, you're a top 3 to 500 player, something in that range, where you're not going to Alabama or Clemson, but you're going to, you're looking at Maryland, West Virginia, Virginia, Rutgers, those kind of schools. Well, you're not going to go to West Virginia because you're not going to get to play in your area. But if you go to Virginia, well, then you can play all these close proximity schools that your family and friends can attend. So I would just think, as it stands right now, that's a huge disadvantage for West Virginia. But now they've got Cincinnati. So I would think that maybe the Big 12 is going to do something close to what we've seen in other conferences, i.e., Mizzou leaves the Big 12, comes to the SEC, and they automatically pin Missouri with Arkansas to make that a last game of the season rivalry. Rutgers and Maryland in the Big 10, they joined. Just a number of examples like that you see across college football, that they would try to, because of the close proximity, pair Cincinnati and West Virginia together as a rivalry.
Yeah, no, I think West Virginia probably has to be the happiest of anyone. To your point about this Big 12 expansion, particularly in the geographic areas that they've expanded to, just because, I mean, yes, it's absolutely, I think, is a recruiting impact to West Virginia, based on where they play. But I think also, the travel is something that I'm sure is continues to be a negative. And I think for football, it's a little bit different. It's only you only have what, 5, 6 road games a year, but at the same time, when you have those games, not even talking about if they have any road non-conference games, but when you go to the conference like that, they're traveling well further of a distance than any other of the Big 12 schools. So I think that's something that has to be taxing, but not to, like I said, not specifically to football. When you talk about these other sports as well, that the travel is tough. So I think that continues to be a challenge both on the recruiting side and the just kind of the day-to-day grind of the athletes, and having that big of a travel disparity in terms of how far that they have to go. Obviously other schools have to go to Morgantown, but it's a one trip a year as opposed to 5, 6 trips a year, to to have to do that. So I think all things considered, with particularly Cincinnati, I think it would certainly, I think the Big 12 would have to throw West Virginia a little bit of a bone here in terms of what that understanding, what their travel schedule has looked like over the few years. But even more, obviously, even more specifically with, um, with now, having the geography a little bit more balanced to a certain degree would be able to help West Virginia without a doubt.
We have a date for the spring game, which is April 22nd. We would have to kind of count backwards and do some reverse engineering to figure out most likely when spring practice is going to start, but it should be sometime in early March. We're
Yeah.
sitting here basically it's the last week of January. So Jason and I will get moving here in the next 4 or 5 weeks leading into spring practice on position previews. So look forward to that here in the next 4 to 6 weeks as we get set for spring practice, and a big one for Oklahoma football, of course. All right. Comments, questions are always welcome. As Jason had alluded to, a couple of you had made comments about Bedlam, and J Ford 2011 says, I believe if Kentucky and Louisville can continue their rivalry, I think Oklahoma and Oklahoma State can continue Bedlam. Well, if the SEC stays with an 8 games, excuse me, if the SEC stays with an 8-game conference season, then it's obviously going to be more feasible for Oklahoma to maintain a rivalry with 4 non-conference games to play with, as opposed to the SEC may be thinking, and I know there's talk out there, and it's real talk, and actually Nick Saban is for a 9-game conference season, because the more teams that you add, if you stay with an 8-game conference season, then it becomes more difficult to have a legitimate conference championship. When if you're playing 8 games, you're missing 7 teams every year in the schedule. 16 teams, 15 other teams for every team, and you're missing 7 games, 7 teams in your schedule if you stay with 8 games. And it's just a difficult rotation to get to play everyone on a fairly regular basis, as opposed to going to 9 games. And then what that does to a team like Oklahoma in their non-conference schedule is, if they're looking at only 3 games that they can schedule non-conference, and if they're always going to play Oklahoma State, then that gives them little scheduling flexibility. And if they want to go out and schedule a major power, are they going to want to play an SEC schedule, Oklahoma State, who at any time could be a really good team, they have been, and then go out and play Penn State or Oregon or somebody else as a non-conference opponent? So I would think that Oklahoma wants to have a little bit more scheduling flexibility than what that would present.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the rigors, whether it's an 8 or a 9 game schedule, conference schedule in the SEC, the rigors of an SEC schedule. Obviously, Kentucky has to go through that as well, right? But I think the rigors of that type of schedule will is a big player in terms of what Oklahoma and Oklahoma State want to do. But I think it's been fairly documented that Oklahoma State is in a position where they don't necessarily want to play Oklahoma moving forward. I think Oklahoma's been in the position where, yeah, we want to try to make it work. Anything that we can do to make this work, to play this game, we want to do it. So I think I think it's a little bit of still. I think there's some. There was a lot of upset feelings in the state of Oklahoma that Oklahoma would go to a conference and just leave Oklahoma State behind. Uh, I mean, I think very similar to even what Texas A&M did, moving to the SEC, and not to that same degree in terms of taking them with them, but separation of that rivalry. And we've seen, for various reasons, whatever reason that you want to mention, if it's because of the rigors of the schedule, or whether it's hurt feelings or whatever, Texas and Texas A&M have not, and they won't even agree to play each other in a bowl game, right at this point, right? So it's unfortunate. I think it's the one drawback of conference realignment that happens, and we lose some of those true rivalries. But at the same time, it allows new rivalries to kind of to manifest and kind of create themselves at that from that perspective. I think LSU and Texas A&M has become a little bit of a rivalry on that side of things. So I think unfortunately it'll be one of those things, Mark, where Oklahoma and Oklahoma State still may play each other maybe once or twice in a 10-year period. But I think you still have to, if you're Oklahoma, still the you have to tread lightly, I think, especially early on as you're getting into this conference, and you with how tough the conference schedule is. You don't necessarily want to set yourself up with a couple of big time opponents in the non-conference. I think what some of the SEC teams have done, which I think has proved to be pretty successful for them, is the SEC always gets the black eye in late November for that week where there's a lot of FCS opponents, or there's a lot of non P5 opponents that are on their schedule from a non-conference side. But you see a lot of them play a pretty solid opponent, maybe a lower tier power five team, or a higher tier group of five team, and then you've got then a lower, a kind of a middle tier of the group of five, and then quite a few of them play FCS opponents as well. So I think you'll still continue to see that, like I said, especially early on, because I don't think you want to give you want to give your school and your teams the biggest opportunity to be successful. And I think if you've got Oklahoma State in there every year, and you still got some some non-conference games with some fairly decent teams, then I think it's one of those things where you don't have a break to a certain degree. I think you're on mute, Mark.
It was mentioned by somebody in the chat that Kentucky and Louisville have maintained their series. And as Jason mentions, yes, Kentucky's in the SEC and plays a difficult schedule. However, if you look at Kentucky's schedule from year to year, they schedule Louisville. They've got 4 non-conference games. So that's the first point that I made a few minutes ago. They've got 4 non-conference games to play with. They play Louisville. They don't play anybody else, and haven't for years. If you go through Kentucky's schedule year after year after year after year, go backwards, they don't schedule anybody else. They're playing 2 MAC schools and an FCS school besides playing Louisville. So point number 1 would be Oklahoma State, I think, has generally been a little bit better than Louisville. Not by a ton, but they're generally better than Louisville. So Oklahoma, if they keep Bedlam, they're going to have one difficult non-conference game. And I don't think they're going to want to, from a national perspective, based on what the expectations are of them, want to never play another meaningful Power 5 game against a brand opponent. They're not going to want to just play Oklahoma State every year and they don't play anybody else. Iowa does that. Iowa State. They play each other, and since they play each other, they don't want to play anyone else, and they never play a meaningful game against another non-conference Power 5 opponent. And our guy Jayford makes the comment here that keeping Bedlam would help OU in terms of strength of schedule for rankings. Once Oklahoma joins the SEC, they're not going to have any issue with proving themselves for rankings. They could play nobody outside. Look at Michigan this year. They played nobody outside the conference, and nobody batted an eye. Sure, some people made fun of them, like me, for not playing anybody non-conference because they should, but that in no way impacted their credibility And certainly being in the SEC, Oklahoma's not going to need to go out there and schedule big opponents. I hope they do. We all want to see good games, non-conference, but they don't need it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think to your point, Mark, Michigan got, I mean, they got roasted time and time again this year for the bad non-conference, games that they had. And I haven't looked at the schedule for 2023, but I think it's similar in 2023 from a non-conference perspective. So yeah, I think it's a balancing act, right? Us as fans, we want to see the best non-conference games as possible as we possibly can, but at the same time, they obviously, they want to balance early on. And I'm not saying that this is something that Oklahoma is going to go to and play, just terrible non-conference opponents, moving forward. But I think I think what will happen early on is, like I said, you'll see, kind of adherence to a certain degree to the SEC non-conference. But I think as time goes on and Oklahoma gets a little bit more acclimated into the SEC, that you'll see some more of those, quality non-conference games that we've seen in the past.
Folks, we appreciate you being here each and every week for Oklahoma Sooners Live right here at the Voice of College Football. We would invite that you would join our Discord. So what that is just a big chat room. If you're not familiar with Discord, it's just a big chat room. You can join us and talk Oklahoma football, talk college football all the time. Just go to patreon.com, search Mark Rogers TV, and sign up right there. It's $5 a month. We've got 100 people online at this point talking college football constantly. And the more people in there, the more that you're going to find conversations that you're looking for. So we invite you there. Again, Jason and I get together every week for OU Sooners Live. We need to coordinate schedules. So just please be locked in with by subscribing and turning on that notifications bell to know when we are going live. All right, Jason, anything else this week?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, like I said, there is one thing. Oklahoma's having a pretty big junior day this weekend from a 2024-2025 cycle. So I think there's somewhere around 20 to 25 kids that are going to be on campus for Oklahoma. And they always do everything they can to get a commitment out of those things as well. But I think it's just the number of people that they have on campus. It is good, obviously, in their typical junior day as 2024, starts to get rolling. Oklahoma doesn't have a commitment yet in the 2024 cycle, but there's a couple of guys that are pretty heavy leans at this point. But other than that, I think just keeping an eye on the coaching situation is something that we'll continue to kind of keep our ear to the ground on and keep the pulse of.
Weston, thanks for being here. Appreciate the compliment there. Appreciate you being here. Everybody, come on back next week and bring a friend or two with you. Let's try to grow the audience here for our Sooner show with you live every week. For Jason Ray, I'm Mark. Great to see everybody. We will catch you next week on OU Sooners Live.